Hi guys. Today I would like to take you back to the Antiquity again and talk about the history of Carthage. This is a several centuries long history with politics, colonization, trade, wars, including epic battles against the Greeks and, more importantly, against Rome, because at the time Carthage threatened the very existence of the nascent Roman Empire. This is also a story with its myth, like the myth of Queen Dido, for example, and well-known characters such as Hannibal, the general, one of the most brilliant military tacticians in history. So this is going to be interesting, I think, but as usual, you don't need to know about the history of the Antiquity. You need only to relax, listen to my voice, and I will take you by the hand through the foundation, the rise and the fall of Carthage. Carthage was founded in the 9th century before Christ, and it was founded by Phoenician people. The Phoenicians were the inhabitants of the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea, in a place that is Lebanon today, and the Phoenicians belonged to the group of Semitic civilizations. There is a lot of confusion today about the meaning of this word, Semitic, because it is often used as a synonym for Jewish. And it is true that the word anti-Semitic or anti-Semitism has come to name prejudice or discrimination against the Jews. But for archaeologists and linguists, Semitic refers to the languages and, by extension, the cultures that occupied the Middle East before our era. There is one Semitic language that is still widely spoken today. It is Arabic, and almost ironically, given the situation in the Middle East, Hebrew also is a Semitic language, which, by the way, reminds us that Jews and Arabs are closely apparented historically, be it from an ethnic point of view or by the language they speak. But returning to the Phoenicians, they were a civilization very oriented towards trade and the seas. this was not an unified civilization. Phoenicia was shared between various independent cities, like city-states, and the most powerful of these cities was called Tyre. It is still possible in Lebanon today to visit the remains of Tyre, but there were others like Sidon, for example, and each of these cities developed a network of colonies and trading posts in the Mediterranean Sea to establish a commercial network that was exchanging trade goods with the inner lands, goods such as pottery and ceramics, textile, dye, and slaves. And very importantly, we will see that later, talking about Carthage, metals that were a precious kind of resource in the Antiquity. These Phoenician cities expanded more and more towards the west, and this is how Carthage was founded, as a colony of the city of Tyre in the western part of the Mediterranean Sea, on the land of modern Tunisia. The city of Carthage at the beginning was a small colony, and there were dozens of these colonies in the south of Italy, on the coast of Africa, and even as far as Iberia, what is Spain today, or the south of France. These Phoenician trade empires, or networks of colonies and trading posts, were rather decentralized. They were not centralized countries or empires as we would imagine them today. The colonies were fairly independent, and they were just paying a tribute to their mother city, be it Tyre or Sidon or Byblos on the coast of Lebanon. And in their expansion in the Mediterranean, the Phoenicians quickly encountered competition from the Greeks. A bit like in Phoenicia, Greek cities were independent from one another. They were often at war between them, and several of the Greek cities had this strategy of expansion, especially towards the south of Italy and the island of Sicily, so that for several centuries there was a fierce battle of influence between the Greeks and the Phoenicians to try and place the island of Sicily under their control. Carthage grew more than other colonies in its first centuries of existence, and progressively emancipated from its mother city of Tyre. And this was made possible by the weakening of the original Phoenician cities that were wealthy and powerful on the seas, but at the mercy of larger land powers, especially Babylonia and later the Persian Empire, that were expanding towards the west, and that besieged and later annexed the Phoenician cities. Because the center of the Phoenician world was declining, Carthage, that was very far from this, took this opportunity to start and develop its own strategy, and became fully independent from the cities that had given birth to it. Carthage really took off in the 6th century before Christ, managing to take control of various islands in the Mediterranean Sea, including Ibiza, Sardinia, Corsica, a large part of Sicily, and also the coasts of Africa and Iberia, becoming the largest trade and military power in the west of the Mediterranean Sea. Of course, Carthage had to face opposition now that it was becoming the center of this Phoenician civilization, and there were numerous battles and wars against the Greeks, mainly for the control of Sicily, that continued to be fiercely disputed, and also a growing rivalry with a new city that was emerging in the center of Italy, Rome. Culturally, Carthage was a remain of this Phoenician civilization. The language that was spoken in Carthage is Punic, a variety of Phoenician, and also one of these Semitic languages that have disappeared. Politically, it had adapted to the kind of government that the Phoenician cities had. It was like an oligarchical republic, a republic in which a small group of powerful families, being nobles or wealthy merchants, were sharing power and naming a sort of king or chief to rule the city. And religion was also the Phoenician religion, with a couple of divinities. The most famous one was the god Baal, the king of gods in the Phoenician pantheon, and his wife Tanit, the goddess of the moon. There is like a black legend about human sacrifices that would have been done to appease these divinities, and especially the god Baal. This is uncertain. Remains of numerous children in dedicated cemeteries have been found on the site of Carthage, but it is unclear whether they were sacrificed or whether they just died naturally. So we don't know. But the gods of Carthage would disappear in the following centuries with the city, putting an end to the existence of this Phoenician culture. Economically, Carthage was a powerful center of trade and craft. Trade because the network of trading posts it had created in the western part of the Mediterranean helped to gather the resources, especially metals in Sardinia or in what is Spain today, which in the Antiquity were important places for the production of tin and copper, very precious metals in the Antiquity because they permitted to make bronze that was the basis for weapons and other products such as the equipment for the cavalry, nails for construction and shipyards, or structures for fortifications such as doors and many other uses. Carthage was also a center of production of textile, of ceramics, of perfumes, and all of these products that were exported to the west towards people living inland, or to the east towards Egypt, the Persian Empire, or even Greece, helped the city to become probably one of the wealthiest cities ever in the Antiquity. And thanks to this wealth, Carthage was able to develop a very powerful navy, having organized its shipyards like Venice would do centuries later. If you watched the video I made about Venice, we could say that Carthage was probably the closest type of city in the Antiquity to what Venice would become in the late Middle Age, almost 20 centuries later. We know very little about what Carthage looked like in reality. At the peak of its power, the city was entirely destroyed after its fall, so we can only imagine a large cities with powerful fortifications. The city was besieged several times in its history, and one that was very powerful on the seas in the 5th century. Carthage was clearly dominating about 2/3 of the Mediterranean Sea, and its supremacy was undisputed on the seas, but also a form of empire that had its weaknesses. One first weakness was political. The colonies that Carthage had founded or seized on the coasts of the Mediterranean Sea were more strictly controlled than Carthage itself had been a couple of centuries before by its mother city. Actually, Carthage sent magistrates to rule or to supervise the management of these colonies, but they had a relative independence to their metropolis, and in the wars that would follow against the Romans especially, some of these colonies changed side and collaborated with the enemies of Carthage. A second type of weakness was that the land army of Carthage was not as powerful as its navy. Carthage and its colonies did not have a very large population, and they relied a lot on kingdoms or tribes that were more or less under their political and military influence, and they relied even more on mercenaries, especially mercenaries coming from Libya, the north coast of Africa, and Numidia, which is the region that corresponds today to the north of Algeria and the western part of Tunisia. The Numids were populations of Berber origin, and this region of the Maghreb, north of Africa, is the historical center of Berber populations, and Carthage was always subject to or threatened by the possibility of revolts of these mercenaries. But in the 5th centuries before Christ, Carthage is at really the height of its power. It dominates the sea, and the city has signed a treaty with Rome that is sharing the zones of influence between the two empires. would continue with the Greeks, mainly for the control of Sicily, until the 3rd century before Christ, remaining fairly indecisive despite a few victories on the seas by Carthage. And what would really pose a much bigger challenge and ultimately would destroy Carthage would be the rise of Rome. Rome had understood pretty quickly that it would not be possible for it to continue its expansion as long as Carthage would dominate the western part of the Mediterranean. In the 3rd century before Christ, the Roman Senate voted an intervention in Sicily to help a group of mercenaries that had rebelled and seized a city belonging to Carthage, which triggered the first war of a series of 3 wars during more than 1 century that would end with the fall and destruction of Carthage. But when the first of these wars starts, we are not there yet, and epic episodes and battles await the two rivaling cities of Rome and Carthage. These 3 wars are called the Punic Wars. You remember that Punic is another word for Phoenician, and because it was a Roman victory, this is the name under which we know them today. The story was written by Rome, and the first of these Punic Wars started in minus 265 and lasted for more than 20 years until minus 241, and was mainly a naval war. There were a few attempts by Rome to engage on land, because this is where the Roman legions had a clear advantage. They landed in North Africa and in Sicily, but that was inconclusive, and they were mainly naval battles that theoretically could have benefited Carthage for its largest fleet at the beginning of the war, but the Romans made a huge effort to develop their navy and develop new tactics, trying to board the ships from Carthage in order to transform these naval fights into land battles on the seas, so that after 20 years of rivalry and various battles, the war still had no clear winner. The two cities were suffering and were destabilized internally, but this is where the political weakness of Carthage, because of its lesser control of its empire, would cost it a lot. Carthage was more weakened internally, and by the end of the First Punic War, there was a revolt of mercenaries asking to be paid that forced Carthage to sign the peace and enter what is known as the Masonry War, during which the city was besieged by armies of Libyan and Numid mercenaries. Ultimately, Carthage prevailed, but Rome took the opportunity, as Carthage was almost in civil war, to seize control of Sicily and Sardinia, that were strategic possessions in the Mediterranean Sea. This episode of the Mercenary War is the subject of a novel that was written in the 19th century by Gustave Flaubert, called Salamba. This is a romantic version of this siege, with the impossible love of the chief of the mercenary army, a historic character called Mato, and Salambo, the priestess of the goddess Tanit in the city. If you want my opinion, I find it quite difficult to read. It is like Gone with the Wind in the Antiquity, but this novel has been quite successful and has contributed to raise interest for the history of Carthage since the 19th century. The power of Carthage came out of this first Punic War, significantly weakened, but still Carthage remained the dominant trade power in the western part of the Mediterranean, and a significant threat to Rome, especially now that the two cities were officially arch enemies. And this rivalry led to the Second Punic War that started in 218 before Christ, after a peace that had lasted a bit more than 20 years. And this Second Punic War is mainly remembered for the expedition of Hannibal. Hannibal Barca, that was the name of the family that ruled Carthage, was a general, and with an army, an extremely large army of regular soldiers and mercenaries, with cavalry and war elephants. He landed in Spain and crossed the Pyrenees towards the south of what is France today, and then crossed the Alps to enter the north of Italy. Crossing the Alps with a large army in this time, including with elephants that came from Africa and were suffering from a very tough climate for them, was an incredible achievement. But he did it, and his army, even for the standards of the Antiquity, was enormous. We are talking about something like 100,000 men, which would not be seen again before modern times, the 18th century. Just for you to compare, battles in Europe in the Middle Age typically opposed armies of a few thousand men on each side. Here we are talking about a gigantic army for the time. And thanks to the quality of the army, especially the Berber cavalry, the mercenaries that had been recruited from Numidia, and thanks to its excellent tactical skills, Hannibal managed to severely defeat the Roman armies and walk towards Rome. The most brilliant victory of Hannibal is the Battle of Cannae. This battle opposed his army that bit by bit was suffering from attrition in Italy to an enormous Roman army. In fact, Carthage was outnumbered in a relation of 2 to 1 in this battle, but by managing to circle the Roman army and make his very good cavalry attack the back of the Roman legions, Hannibal achieved a fabulous victory and annihilated the Roman army. Then he could have walked towards Rome to try and take the city, but he did not. The reasons are unclear. Maybe he did not have the necessary force anymore. Maybe he proved too undecisive, but the bottom line is that Rome would not be captured by Carthage, and bit by bit the army of Carthage would be reduced and finally destroyed by counterattacks from Rome. At the same time, the Romans had landed in North Africa and were directly threatening Carthage, which forced the peace with a heavy defeat for Carthage that established the domination of Rome. The Third Punic War that took place a few decades later mainly came from Rome's fear that as long as Carthage would exist, Rome could not rest assured that it would control this part of the world. And it is this Third Punic War in which Rome now had a clear advantage that ended with the capture and entire destruction of Carthage. The site where the city of Carthage had previously existed was not abandoned. Actually, this part of Tunisia became a Roman province, and a new Carthage of Roman culture and clearly under Roman influence developed and reached a certain level of prosperity, but obviously we were not talking about the same city anymore, and the site declined again in the following centuries. After the Roman Empire had fallen, the Vandals, a barbaric tribe, took control of this part of North Africa and Sicily, and made the new Carthage their capital. And Carthage was destroyed again when the Muslim invaders coming from the Arabic Peninsula reached this part of Africa in the 7th century of our era. What remains of Carthage today is essentially this image of the city that could have been Rome instead of Rome. But it's always easy to remake the history with hypothesis of this kind. If Carthage had won the war against Rome, the destiny of humanity would have been totally different. The languages we speak in the Western world are in heritage in terms of philosophy, in terms of religion, in terms of law, of architecture. The transfer to us of Greek philosophy and conceptions of the world, all of that is the result of Roman domination in this part of the world for centuries. If a city like Carthage that belonged to a different civilization had taken this role, or had prevented the Roman Empire from existing, the world could have been totally different. This is all for today. I hope, as usual, that you enjoyed this presentation, and that I will see you soon with another topic.